People who lost family members to gun violence spoke about the need for gun legislation at a meeting with Senate Democrats. They were joined by students, teachers, and a law enforcement official at this meeting held by the Senate Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, which is chaired by Senator Debbie Stabenow.
What about Tom now? We may have to have a hearing about HOGG questions.
Well, good afternoon. Call the hearing to order, and first want to thank everyone that is here. We wish we didn't have to be here. We wish this was not an issue that had touched your lives and so many people across our country. We're doing a hearing because it's our understanding that other formal hearings happening in the Senate will not include your voices, and we believe your voices are very, very important. Before making a few opening comments, though, I want to give colleagues that are here an opportunity to introduce you. We're going to introduce all of our witnesses. First, we do know that people are juggling schedules and they care deeply about being here. And so before any opening comments, and I should also thank David, who's here by Skype. Thank you so much. And also, we thank everyone joining us live, and we hope that you will join us also in pushing for action. But let's start. Senator Nelson, obviously a very key leader and certainly someone who has been living and breathing what's been happening recently. I'd like to ask Senator Nelson to introduce David, and as well as Fred Gutenberg, and then other colleagues introducing witnesses from their state as well.
We're going to hear first from David HOGG, who is there on the screen. David is 17 years old. He's a student at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. He's a survivor of the February 14th shooting. That was just 3 weeks from today. Since then, he has become an avid advocate for gun violence prevention. David and his fellow classmates have taken this movement and they've made it the #1 issue that they are talking about nationally. While David was the target of an ugly conspiracy, and that conspiracy came from the far right. He has not let them stop him from continuing to speak out on the need for legislation that prevents gun violence from taking more lives. David, I have met with so many of the students such as David, and they are really impressive.
Yes.
Next, we're going to hear from Fred Gutenberg, and Fred is standing because Fred cannot talk about this sitting down, because Fred tragically lost his daughter, Jamie, at the high school shooting. Fred, on behalf of all of our colleagues, you know how we feel about your loss, and the folks sitting up here at this table want to get something done about it. And I think it's telling that these witnesses have not been invited for official Senate hearings. And we have to do this as the minority. That's telling in itself. Well, what Fred has done is he's taken this devastating loss and he's turned it into a platform for advocacy on gun violence prevention and the need to protect students and alumni from that school who are leading this movement. And I can tell you he's had a number of threats against him, just like David Hogg has had a conspiracy directed at him. And so we really look forward to hearing from you both.
Thank you so much. And to introduce Francine Wheeler, we have both Senator Blumenthal and Senator Murphy to each make a comment of introduction. Thank you.
I want to thank all of the participants, survivors in today's hearing, and my colleagues for giving us this opportunity to hear and listen to some of the stories that all of our colleagues have an obligation to heed. Francine Wheeler is someone I met about 5 years ago. I wish we'd met in a different way for a different reason. Just over 5 years ago, Francine and her husband David lost their dear son Ben in an act of unspeakable grief and horror that we now know in a pernicious kind of shorthand as Sandy Hook. And both my colleague Chris Murphy and I were there that day and for days afterward, speaking with Francine and David and other moms and dads and loved ones who suffered that loss. What impressed me so deeply in the days and weeks and years afterward is their courage and strength in advocating with grace and dignity and incredible courage and strength for common sense measures to stop gun violence. In the face of that unspeakable loss, they came forward and spoke truth to power, truly, in these halls, in the months afterward, and we came close to steps that would have helped save lives. Sandy Hook became the first of that pernicious shorthand for other mass slaughters that occurred afterward. Orlando, Sutherland Springs, the list goes on, and now Parkland. I want to thank both Francine and David and all the Sandy Hook moms and dads and loved ones for their advocacy. We have no higher rate of mental illness than other modern countries. We have a rate of gun violence that is multiples, off the charts, as Senator Murphy and I have said repeatedly, and Congress has been complicit by its inaction. In effect, an aider and abetter in those deaths. So dealing with this issue is something that should be before one of our committees. The Judiciary Committee, for example, where I sit, ought to be having a hearing on it, and yet we will not be hearing from you. And I just want to thank you for being here today. Tomorrow, Senator Graham and I will be offering a measure that is modeled on one of Connecticut's statutes passed before Sandy Hook, but strengthened during it. It would be a red flag that would provide for a red flag process to take guns away from dangerous people, prevent people with serious mental illness or other reasons that they're dangerous to themselves or others from buying or having a weapon. And the statutes passed as a result of the advocacy from Francine and others in Connecticut have worked. There's a record of their working. And that's the record that we should be heeding in this body through their advocacy and their courage and strength, which should be a model for us all. Thank you for being here, Francine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Murphy, would you like to give a welcome?
I know we want to get directly to the testimony here. Let me just thank Francine for being here, for what her and David have done over the last 5 years. Francine and her husband moved to Newtown in 2007 for, quote, the good public schools and a yard where our sons could run around and be safe. It sounds familiar to a lot of us as we make decisions about how we want to order our lives. They remained very much connected to New York, and I feel like I know Ben by all the stories that I've heard from the Wheelers and from other friends. One story that I'm fond of is that when they'd go back to New York, they would ride the 7 train every single time, and as Francine notes, Ben was more interested in the subways than he was in the museums or the zoos, and that also sounds familiar too. That probably sounds like a lot of our kids and grandkids, and that's just a reminder of why we are here today. There, but by the grace of God, have we not gone through a tragedy like this, and your testimony today will help us guide the way forward.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn now to Senator Kaine, Tim Kaine, for our next 2 witnesses to give a brief introduction. And then we have 3 other colleagues as well. And then we certainly want, most importantly, to hear from all of you.
Thank you, Senator STABENOW, and thank all of you. I want to introduce you to 2 pretty amazing Virginia families who have been deeply scarred by gun violence, but have taken those painful experiences and used them to the benefit of others. Lori HAAS. Lori's the mom of young daughter Emily, who was a survivor of the 2007 shooting at Virginia Tech. I met Lori the day after the shooting in April of 2007. Lori has been passionate and is now the founder and the director of the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence in Virginia. After Lori's daughter was shot and in the long and painful recovery process, Lori grew horrified by the lax gun laws and became deeply involved in the gun violence prevention movement. And we've had other scarring tragedies in Virginia, sadly, since then. But Lori has not only been an advocate before our legislature and before Congress, but also a compassionate friend and somebody in solidarity with others. I just did a roundtable on this issue in Hampton last week, and Lori was there with community members, and I so appreciate her leadership, respect her, and I'm glad she's here. I want to introduce you to the Bose family. Kimberly Bose, Alec Bose, one of her children, who will also say a word. Mr. Bose, this is a family who lost their son, Joe. Joe was a youngster, an energetic young man from Northern Virginia who was a student at in Hampton, Virginia, and was visiting some friends at Old Dominion University across the water in Norfolk in October of 2015 when he was shot and killed. According to news reports at the time, Joe had dreams of graduating from Hampton with a journalism degree and pursuing music, maybe as a producer or in radio. He was passionate about social justice, and he canvassed for Barack Obama in the 2008 presidential election. He canvassed, though he wasn't yet a voter. He was excited, looking forward to casting his first vote for president in the 2016 election, and he would have turned 22 the day after Christmas 2016. This is a situation in which the killer, the perpetrator of this crime, is still at large. Kim has become a very outspoken advocate for gun safety legislation. And Kim, to you and Alec and Mr. Bose, thank you all so much for sharing your experience and advocating for others.
Thank you very much. And I'm looking, I know that Senator Van Hollen, I'm not seeing him. I know he wants to be here to introduce our next guest, and I'm sure he will be coming. Chief, we really appreciate you being here today. Chief Stawinski was unanimously confirmed chief by the Prince George's County Council in 2016. He served more than 25 years in the Prince George's County Police Department, a department that serves about 1 million residences. The county holds gun buyback programs and young adult outreach programs to reduce local gun violence. We look forward to hearing your comments about those experiences. And sadly, the chief recently lost one of his officers who was shot and killed while responding to a domestic violence incident involving a firearm. So we are honored to have the corporal's wife here, Tammy, with us today as well, and we thank you for his service to the community. So important. So welcome. We are very pleased to have you and appreciative of having you. And Senator Van Hollen is here. So I was speaking for you, and now you may speak for yourself. Senator Van Hollen, I knew you were coming, and I've just introduced the chief. I also know you have another witness as well, Katrina Nickbush, so I will let you make a comment about both of them.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Stabenow and Senator Nelson, for bringing us together at this urgent moment where we really need to finally act, and thank all of you for being here. Chief Stawinski, thank you for your credible leadership. Chief Stawinski is the police chief in a very large county, about 1 million people, right outside the District of Columbia, Prince George's County. And he's been very effective at community policing, and also been a leader in the effort to develop common sense gun safety measures. And I am pleased that in the state of Maryland, we have implemented many common sense gun safety measures. Unfortunately, like a lot of our states, we're not islands. And as a result, if you look at Baltimore City, for example, the number of guns used in crimes, 60% of them come from out of state. But I want to thank the chief for being here today and for all his testimony. We're working on a number of measures. And Katrina Kickbush is a terrific education leader, a teacher, special education teacher, serving in Baltimore, graduate of Drake University, then went to Gallaudet University and received her Master's of Science in Deaf Education. And for the past 8 years, she has worked at the Wolf Street Academy, which is a Baltimore City public school with charter status, where she's been a very effective and beloved special education teacher. So thank you for being here to offer us the perspective of someone who's facing these issues in the classroom and being such a wonderful teacher to our kids.
Thank you so much. And last, certainly not least, I'm going to turn to Senator Wyden. Eva, you should know that when we talked about this hearing, Senator Wyden immediately approached me and said, I was in the community at a meeting with a passionate young woman who I'd love to have come and be a voice from Oregon. And so we're so glad you could be here. Senator Wyden.
Senator Stabenow, thank you so much, and to you and Senator Nelson for your leadership. And you're absolutely right. Eva Jones stood up at a town hall meeting that I had a few days ago in tiny and rural Odell, Oregon, population 2,500. And suffice it to say, her presentation was just riveting. And I thought it was important for our colleagues to hear it. And the essence of what Eva said, and I couldn't begin to do it justice, is she essentially said, we students have had it. We are tired of trying to find cabinets that we might fit into in order to hide. She mentioned the beautiful windows at her high school and said, we think about which ones we ought to be walking in front of, because if we go to a particular window, we might be susceptible to being shot and killed. And at that meeting in a hotel, you just couldn't hear a pin drop. And I want to close with what Eva said. Eva said, and my guess is there are other students around this country saying the same thing. She said, you know, I'm a student. And what I have to say really doesn't matter, because I'm not an adult and I'm not a voter. And we talked about all the ways in which she could build support for common sense measures to counter gun violence. And I'm not sure she ever thought that she'd be before a group of some of the most influential
senators to describe specifically how she feels and what she wants us to do. But for all the students across this country who are saying to themselves, nobody wants to pay attention, nobody wants to listen to us, Eva, you're speaking for them today, and you're here because Oregonians saw that yours was a voice that was going to help us make the changes we need.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. And let me officially, now that we have introduced everyone, make an opening comment. Ask Senator Nelson as my co-chair to do that. And then we want an opening comment from a woman who has been an incredible leader for years as it relates to common sense gun laws. And so I'll turn to Senator Feinstein. But then we're going to hear from David. And we appreciate all of you and your patience. I want to thank all of you again whose lives have been forever changed by gun violence. We're here today to listen, but you've had to experience this in ways that nobody wants to have to experience this. And we are grateful that you are willing to share your feelings and your views. I particularly want to thank the young people who have galvanized people to focus now on what is happening in schools and communities, for your energy, your urgency, and your passion. And your voices, the things to come, the march to come, the other efforts are incredibly important in moving us forward to get action. We all know that today's young people were born after Columbine. When you think about it, they've never lived in a time where they didn't have to worry about their own schools joining the heartbreaking list. Red Lake, Minnesota, Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Roseburg, Oregon, Marshall County, Kentucky, Parkland, Florida. And beyond the horrific headlines, we know that far too many communities in Michigan and across the country are facing violence every day. Children can't go to the park, can't ride their bicycle to the corner store, or even maybe do their homework or watch TV in their living room because of a worry of shots coming in through the window. I'm from Michigan, and I understand and appreciate our wonderful hunting and outdoor heritage, and that's how I grew up. And I know we can take common sense gun actions to keep our children and our communities safe while respecting legal gun ownership. We could start with universal background checks. One recent poll found that 97% of people surveyed support background checks for all gun buyers as the first step. And I want to arm our teachers, not with guns, but with textbooks and computers and pencils and support staff like school social workers and nurses and counselors. Ending gun violence won't be easy. Change never is. However, seeing everybody here today gives me hope, and I know it gives my colleagues hope as well. From students to parents to teachers to law enforcement officials to lawmakers, we're here today to say we've had enough. We can do better for our children. We must do better for our children. And it's time for Congress to act. So thank you for joining us, and I want to turn for a moment to Senator Nelson again as a co-chair.
We're all bound by these tragedies. And of course, you all know that we unfortunately have had more than our share in Florida just in the last 2 years. Pulse, and then the Fort Lauderdale Airport, and now the high school. I'm sure everybody within the sound of our voice is going to participate in the March 24th march in some city in this country. So let's get on and let's hear from our witness.
Thank you so much. And somebody who's been at the front of the line in leading for our country on the issues of gun violence and gun safety, Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Oh, thank you very much, Debbie. Senators. My words to congratulate the people at this table for your strength and for your ability to even be here. I was thinking if I were a mother or a sister or a brother, I don't know where I'd be, but I want you to know this. I came here in 1993 with a view to get rid of assault weapons. I succeeded initially in a bill that lasted for 10 years. It did reduce the incidents, it did reduce the deaths, and it did reduce the injuries, but it sunset after 10 years. Senator Murphy and I and many of the people at this table put together a bill after Sandy Hook. And here's what we thought. We thought, you know, 6- and 7-year-old children, this will not, something like this could never happen, but it did happen. And since Sandy Hook, there have been 200 school shootings. There have been 400 youngsters and adults shot and or killed. And it goes on. And we live in a country that's 4% of the population of the world that has 40% of the guns. And the guns, regardless, are falling into the wrong hands. And when the guns are military weapons of war with special ability to shoot straight, to have the kind of bullets and velocity that do terrible harm to the human body, we have a real problem. And so I just want you to know that we have rewritten the assault weapons legislation. It will take out of commission 205 assault weapons, and it will permit 2,258 rifles and shotguns that are used for hunting and other legal purposes throughout this nation. And I don't intend to stop. One way or another, we're going to get weapons of war off of the streets of America. So be strong, ladies and gentlemen. Please know that you have a group that's supporting you, and we intend to change the nature of gun use in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Feinstein. David, we're so glad you could join us through the wonders of technology. And we know you're back at school, but yeah, your voice is very important, and we want to have an opportunity to hear from you today. So please proceed.
Sure. So to begin with, I'm just going to talk about Parkland a little bit. Parkland represents the American dream. Parkland is the last place that I would ever expect something like this to happen. And in all honesty, we've become so habituated to this type of thing in the United States that we've just started to prepare, and the fact that we're having to even think about what to do in an active shooter scenario at our school is a testament to the state that this country has been brought to. Due to the inaction of politicians and fighting along partisan lines, we've come to this point where we say we're going to do things, act like we're going to do things for our re-elections, and then nothing happens. Now is the time that we need to take action, because how many more times, how many more children are going to need to be slaughtered? So I just want to get across 5 main points that I think really summarize what we're really trying to accomplish here among both party lines. And the first one is fixing the funding for the CDC research into gun violence, because under the Dickey Amendment right now, it's basically impossible for them to do any research into gun violence in America. That's just insane, considering the fact that we have such a large governmental organization that's so well funded, and we're not able to actually do research into this massive problem that's taking thousands of American lives every year. It's insane to think about it that way. And the second one is the digitalization of gun sales, because right now the ATF, they have to have all the gun sales and records that they have are legally required to be on paper. That makes it very hard for them to essentially find many of these guns. Many records of guns are lost. For example, during Katrina, there were many gun stores that lost the records. ATF had to lose many of them because they flooded. And if they were digitized and saved at multiple locations, that wouldn't have happened. It also makes it easier for them to do their research and get those things through. The third thing is universal background checks. As you said earlier, there's widespread support for universal background checks. It's something that I think we could push through on both party lines, and it's something that's just sensible gun reform and would at least hopefully make some action to prevent these individuals from getting guns. And the fourth one is, creating a high-capacity magazine ban, because right now what we have is these individuals that are able to get like hollow point bullets and things like that. And they're bullets that are made to shred flesh. They literally are intended to go into the body and spread out so that they can tear apart as many veins and lives as possible. And then the fourth one is, as you were saying earlier, what I personally what I would like to see is at least some kind of reform with assault weapons, because I think this has continued for too long. If you believe it's an assault weapons ban that can do that, that's great. But any reform along those lines where we can prevent these huge guns from getting into the hands of the wrong individuals, I can be in support of that. And I think a lot of people need to understand that the government's not trying to take your guns. We're supporting the Second Amendment. We just want limitations on the Second Amendment in the same way that there's limitations on the First. In the same way that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, we don't think that you should be able to get a gun if you're a mentally unstable individual, somebody with a history of, with a criminal record, or somebody that's just mentally unstable. It's as simple as that. This is common sense gun reform that we can push through on both party lines. And I say now is the time where we need to come together, not as Democrats and Republicans, but as Americans, and save these children's lives, and as such, our future. And I want to thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you so much. And you're right, we have to work together. That's how things get done. And even though we are here through the Democratic Policy Committee, we will work with our Republicans without a doubt, colleagues, to get the right thing done. You can count on that. And I want to take a moment. Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, has joined us. I want to thank you so much for your ongoing leadership over the years.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Debbie. I want to thank Mr. Hogg and all of those who came here, particularly those who lost loved ones, members of the panel. It is so hard to do something like this, and what you're doing, instead of cursing the darkness or the horrible and evil that befell you, you're trying to light a candle, and that inspires us. And we thank you, Mr. Hogg, and everybody else. This caucus stands very strong in trying to do something about guns. I've been trying a long time. I was the author of the Brady Law. Dianne Feinstein was author of the assault weapons ban more than 20 years ago. And that Brady Law there are tens of thousands of people walking the streets who would have been dead. They don't know who they are. We don't know who they are, but it happened. But unfortunately, they plucked holes in that legislation. We stand for universal background checks. We stand for assault weapons, dealing with assault weapons, and we stand for protection orders. And those are the three issues, and I've talked to some of the students and some of the others who I've met, that we are going to push and push and push until we get them done. Because you inspire us, but more importantly, it's a necessity. It's a necessity in America to try and deal with this. And we will fight hard to do it, and that's why I came by. I wanted to assure all of you how strongly we feel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Guttenberg, thank you.
Can you hear me through the mic? Oh, there you go.
There you go.
First, if anybody wants to know why, after losing my daughter only 3 weeks ago, why I'm optimistic, it's because I've gotten to know David and the other kids at this school, and they give me optimism. They're unbelievable. David, I'm just proud of you, so thank you for doing this today.
Thank you, David.
So everyone fully understands why I'm standing. These acts of violence happen way too often. And after they happen, unfortunately, the response is always way too comfortable, way too polite, and way too temporary. I have no interest in being polite. I have no interest in being comfortable or making anyone else comfortable when we talk about it. No one should feel comfortable talking about the death of my kid. And I have no interest in being temporary. I know I can speak for myself, but for these kids as well, we're not going anywhere. So this is a debate. This is the time, and we're going to get this done. 3 weeks ago, on February 14th, which was Valentine's Day, Day of Love, it started in my house like any other, with chaos. Trying to get kids ready for school, trying to get the dogs taken care of, my wife and I to do what we needed to do. We're making sure we got everything done. My wife and I, we needed to get out of the house. My kids were running late. The one thing I remember about that morning is my kids just running out. The last time I ever saw my daughter, I don't remember if I said, I love you. I don't remember. It haunts me till this very minute. If you want to know why I'm here, That's why I'm here. I cannot remember. I'm sorry. My kids left for school that day like any other. Only one of them would make it home. My daughter, Jamie, was murdered. Or some folks like to say these guns are used for hunting. So my daughter was hunted at school on Valentine's Day, and I cannot remember if I even told her that morning that I love her. We are forever changed. I am no longer just a dad to Jesse and Jamie. My wife, who was intensely private, not only lost her baby girl, but it happened in a way that was horrific and public. In life, I've always told my wife and kids that as long as we wake up in the morning and those we love and care about are safe and healthy, and we go to sleep at night and everyone we care about is still safe and healthy, that's a good day. Everything else in the between is just a bunch of stuff we need to deal with. Unfortunately, we've been having some bad days now. Jesse, my son, and my wife Jen, and I will have to go on without Jamie in our house. Our family and friends who live for her voice and spirit will not feel it ever again. It'll be different. Her humor, her craziness, her energy, her feistiness, it'll be missed. My baby girl was the energy in the room and in our house. She was the energy in every room that she went into. Our new normal is going to be a lot quieter. I'll miss the sounds of her laughter, her dog talk, don't ask, her unbelievable ability to never stop talking, and how quickly she would say things because she always had so much to say. They were the sounds that gave our life meaning and our house energy. Jamie lived life. She was the energy in the room. She was always made her presence known. Jamie was a competitive dancer. That was her passion. 2 weekends ago was the first competition, always an event in our house and something we looked forward to. Rather than being a competition weekend with Jamie, my wife and I were instead visiting her at a cemetery. The day after this murder, I attended a vigil in Parkland. I was asked if I wanted to speak, and I said yes. I did not prepare, but I had a lot that I felt I needed to say. This was the beginning of a public life. My life is now forever changed as my public role continues to evolve. I have dedicated the rest of my life to fighting for the cause of gun safety, and I won't stop. No other parent should ever go through what my family and 16 other families are going through. What is unfathomable is how this is not unique to us. This had become something that was becoming way too common. This time, the gun rights crowd messed with the wrong community, the wrong kids, and the wrong dad. My kids were everything to me, and I intend to be a part of breaking this gun lobby. There are simply too many shootings and too many losses of life for us as a civilized society. Over my crash course this past couple of weeks, a couple of things have become clear to me. The gun lobby simply has too much influence over lawmakers, not necessarily you, regarding decisions on our safety. The gun lobby uses the language of mental health and the language of paranoia to incite fear and scare people into the belief that they need to have guns, and any attempt to put normal limits on that, as we would with anything else, is the start of a government overreach that must be stopped. I have quickly come to realize that most legislators are not leaders. They follow the mob or the money. It is clear to me that even though we elect our lawmakers with the expectation that they will be strong leaders, on this issue, most of them are followers. The gun lobby talks about the Second Amendment. I happen to believe in the Second Amendment, just not the bastardized version presented by the gun lobby and expressed by the lawmakers who follow it. Unfortunately, this bastardized version has led to these weapons of war being widely available, and as a result, my daughter has been murdered. She had rights as well. She had a right to life. She had a right to be a believer in the Second Amendment, but all of that has now been terminated. We cannot allow a gun lobby who truly believes in no limits to control the decisions of lawmakers, as no other person should be afraid of getting shot for simply being in school or some other public place. Because our lawmakers will not do the right thing out of fear of the gun lobby, we need to break this lobby. How can we do it? We pierce the aura of strength and we take away the money. In Florida, even after this mass murder, too many legislators were still opposed to any gun legislation and are bowing to the gun lobby wish. And just a quick update, in Florida, we're about to pass what I would call the bare minimum in legislation, but the fact that we're getting this done in Florida against the wishes of the NRA, that's a big deal. The only reason that gun lobby would be opposed to the most minimal effort proposed is that it pierces the aura of strength that they have. Once legislators start gun safety legislation, they look at that as a loss for the lobby, and they figure other losses will follow. The most significant hits to the gun lobby are being led by corporate America, as they are being heroic. They are doing two things. First, they are terminating direct business relationships with the lobby to end financial benefits to the members and to weaken the lobby financially. Second, they are ending the retailing of weapons of war and simply not waiting on lawmakers to change the age to 21. They are doing it on their own. Shame on the weak-kneed lawmakers, I apologize, who can't cut to common sense measures as well. Corporate America will lead and show you can take on the lobby and not pay a price. Legislators will watch and eventually follow. In addition to changing the gun culture in this country, again, an effort being led by corporate America, but one that I predict legislators will eventually follow, we need to get the NRA to open its books. We need to show America where they get their money and where it goes. People need to understand that the NRA effort is not done with the safety of Americans as its main concern, and most likely has some more concerning purpose. This will not be easy. It will take time. Just an idea that I had after going back and forth with an NRA member about why he should be able to keep his weapons. We should force every gun owner to, number one, be licensed, to have to register every weapon, and they should have to buy insurance on that weapon commensurate with the risk. So if somebody wants to tell me that they should have guns, you know what? Go ahead, like a car. But the more risk that your gun has, the more your insurance. Money tends to change behavior, so why don't we try to change the behavior through money? Make sure that the process of owning a gun includes responsibility. The lobby would be against these common sense efforts, and so would the legislators who support the lobby. This alone gets to the BS about this being a Second Amendment issue. As the kids from Parkland say, we need to call BS from now on. Anyone who has a legislator that will not fight for their safety, we need to fire them. That's the end of my prepared remarks, but I do want to bring to your attention something, and I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the video that the NRA put out 2 days ago, okay, because they put a target on all of your backs, okay? The NRA, a lobby that finances campaigns, that forces legislation, put out a video basically saying your time is running out. And here is Dana Lausch in the video talking to legislators who don't support her, members of the media who she called out by name, members of the acting community and sports figures, telling everybody if they don't get behind the NRA, their time is running out. And she had an hourglass. At the end of her talking, she turns it over and she said, your time's up. A few days before this video, she had another video called A Call to Arms. I ask you a question. If this was put out by a terrorist organization, we would be raising the terror threat level in this country. Why are we letting this lobby have anything to do in D.C.? I don't understand it. I apologize.
You have nothing to apologize for, and we thank you for coming and for your powerful statement and your commitment. And we're here because we're standing with you. Francine Wheeler and beautiful Ben. I love that picture. It's what a beautiful little boy.
Yeah. I live in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. I'm a mother and a music teacher. I have 3 boys. The youngest is 3, and the oldest is about to turn 15. Our middle son, Our middle son, Ben, wasn't the middle son when he was 6. On December 14th, 2012, I got him a hot chocolate at Starbucks and dropped him off at school. I never saw him alive again. He was killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School about a half hour after I dropped him off. I am not here to tell you about that day or that week or the few months that followed. I want to tell you about the last 5 years. The 5 years after what was left of my family stood in a classroom at Newtown High School, and President Obama hugged me and wouldn't let go until I could catch my breath and stop crying. It's different this time because people are taking it personally, he said. But it wasn't different. I miss Ben every day, but some days are more awful. Every time there's been a mass shooting since Ben and his classmates and teachers were killed, our world is rocked again. We fought the urge to stay under the covers in the morning so many times now it's become a familiar struggle. Every time I have to see the faces in the grocery store and their looks of weary care, concern, and pity. Every time my husband has to go to the office where his sympathetic and generous co-workers leave him alone until they can get a read on how he's doing. Every time an administrator at my eldest son's school emails, calls, texts, goes completely out of his or her way to make sure that he is okay. Does he need space? Does he need to talk? Is he really okay? Every time, the hole in my heart, the size and shape of my 6-year-old son is opened once more, regardless of how successful I may have been at patching it up until that point. After each one of these events, we're not the ones who really need the help. The ones who need the help are the fresh ranks of the grieving. The shattered family members left to sort out how to make sense of this insanity. And every single time, the previous group moves one place further back and watches more families line up in front of them while they experience their own individual specific version of what I've related to you here. My argument for sensible gun legislation to change the course of these horrific tragedies is not a speculative fear of what might happen to me or my family. My argument lies in the earth, a few miles from my front door in our town cemetery, 6 years old forever. And I'm just one mom in the expanding congregation of grief. Please do something meaningful and serious.
Thank you, Francine. Lori HAAS, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lori HAAS, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. On the morning of April 16th, 2007, I received a phone call from my then 19-year-old daughter with the words that changed everything. "Hi, Mommy, I've been shot." My daughter Emily, who suffered 2 graze wounds to her head, was one of only 7 to survive in her classroom of 18 students. 32 other students and staff were shot and killed that morning. 17 others were injured, like Emily, and another half a dozen or so were injured jumping out a second-floor window to avoid the gunfire. Emily kept local police on the line of a cell phone she kept hidden from the shooter during the entire ordeal. She played dead as the shooter entered her room 3 times, hiding the phone from him. Her bravery that morning, little known to the outside world, was heralded by law enforcement as critical to their response. She is a hero to them, to her family, and to those who know her best. She's a teacher now, with a 2-year-old daughter and a grandson on the way. Post-traumatic stress disorder is difficult for anyone, but for those with little life experiences, it can be brutal and confusing. Can you imagine students returning to the scene of their attempted murder over and over and over again, as Emily and the other injured students did at Virginia Tech? And now, and every day, more and more students are doing the same. Yet, it pales beyond description for the suffering of any family whose loved one has been killed with a gun. Please, don't say they were lost. They were shot and killed, murdered by someone who should not have had a gun. Regulation of firearms in this country is desperately needed to determine who, how, when, and where someone is allowed to own and carry a firearm. Inaction is arming the very people who harm our families. Fueled by the guns everywhere and immoral greed of the gun lobby, the daily carnage of gun violence is an epidemic that sadly only sees the light of day when a mass shooting shines the spotlight on this issue. Every child killed by a gun deserves a hearing. Gun deaths are the third leading cause of death among American children. It's a public health epidemic. The number one job of those elected to office is to keep our citizens safe. And far too many of those elected have failed miserably at their job for far too long. They must be voted out of office, and I predict many of them will lose in the coming local, state, and federal election cycles. Voters are fed up and will make this issue, gun violence prevention, the litmus test for who gets their vote. We've seen this time and again in Virginia in recent years. Governor McAuliffe, Lieutenant Governor Northam, and Attorney General Herring ran and won on guns statewide in 2013, and it was no different this cycle. In November of 17, guns was cited as the #2 issue in exit polls in Virginia when Democrats swept statewide office and picked up 17 seats in the House in a blue wave. Candidates across Virginia embraced gun violence prevention, ignored the millions of dollars spent by the gun lobby here in Virginia in 2017, and committed to saving lives. Governor Northam, Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and Attorney General Herring appeared at a GVP rally on the front steps of the NRA headquarters in Fairfax, Virginia. They're all in office now. The power of the gun lobby is inflated when those running for office give credence to its influence. And another point, the NRA does not deserve a the NRA does not deserve a seat at the table when discussing solutions to gun violence. It's offensive to survivors everywhere. They're a lobbyist organization whose sole purpose is making as much money for themselves and the firearms industry as possible. As my friend Barbara Parker has said, our children should not be collateral damage for the profiteering of the gun lobby. And that's exactly what has happened and is happening. Gun deaths, suicides, and homicides are on the increase, and we must have elected officials who will stand firm and support policies intended to reduce gun violence in all its forms. A history of violence is the single biggest predictor of future violence. Yet we do nothing to disarm those at risk. There's no single policy that is the solution. We need an array of approaches to begin to reduce this epidemic. Extreme risk laws, prohibitions for those convicted of violent misdemeanors, trafficking laws to diminish the flow of illegal guns into impacted communities, a ban on and regulation of weapons of war, resources for communities disproportionately affected by gun violence, public health approaches that include permanent funding for the CDC, stripping liability protection for the gun manufacturers, and the very foundation upon which all of these prohibitions can be enforced, universal background checks. It is far too late for far too many families. But please make something happen so that our future, our children, are safe from gun violence. Every American deserves freedom, freedom from gun violence. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Kimberly Moss, welcome, and I know your son Alec is here with you as well. We really appreciate both of you coming, and we are very, very sorry for the loss of your son.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Delane Bowes, and I am the mother of Joseph Kevin Bowes, an amazing young man senselessly snatched away from us and this nation way too soon by the evil that often lurks behind the trigger of a gun. By a show of hands, how many of you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, children you care about? How many of you have children that might be in college right now? How many of you have children that might have been on the dean's list this past semester? Or how many of you have children that are interested in sports? I do want to see your hands, I really do. How about specifically lacrosse? I smile because so many of your children are just like my son, Joseph. Now, I ask you to close your eyes and imagine, or in your mind's eye, looking out of your bay window of your suburban home and seeing 3 police officers approaching your front door. Now, your first thought might be, I wonder what must have happened in our neighborhood, a neighborhood of well-educated families with senior citizens, only to open the door to receive the most devastating and life-crushing news that anyone could ever receive, that my baby, my child, my lacrosse player, my journalist, my best friend, one of the great loves of my life, that my child from my womb, my Joseph, had been horrifically and senselessly shot and fatally wounded through absolutely no fault of his own. I immediately, and still am, in complete denial. This can't be real. You must have the wrong person. Not my incredible son. Can't be. My son is a junior in college, doing so well in his classes. He just landed his 2nd internship with the university. I just spoke with him and shared his excitement. This can't be real. For the remainder of the day, I was on a mission to prove that the authorities had gotten it wrong. After many calls from the university and authorities, after making hundreds of calls to my son Joseph with no answer, after driving to Norfolk near the Old Dominion University campus where the horrific event took place, my mind shifted to a fog, a blur, and there it remains. I still can't believe this is real. I can't imagine life without him. I choose to believe that I'm living in a bad dream. It's easier for me that way. I can't imagine life without the natural, provoking laughter, without the generous spirit, without his hugs and kisses, without his need to protect me from all invited glares or rude words. I can't imagine life without him telling me about his desire to be the next Oprah Winfrey or Ed Bradley, about his desire to vote in the next presidential election. I can't imagine life without him telling me what he was going to name his children and how he would care for me as I grew older. I can't imagine life without seeing him push himself to be successful, constantly emailing professors to ensure his classes were on track. I ask for your patience in that I'm still unable to speak in the past tense. So many of my references to Joseph tend to be in the present tense. You see, Joseph is an amazing, magnetic, effervescent, real, and thoughtful person, always giving his last to his friends and his family. He's smart, kind, and always attempting to do the right thing for his friends, family, relatives, and even the needy person on the street. He truly is that kind of guy to his very core. I think what infuriates me the most is that some have made the assumption that somehow Joseph or others or anybody else that's been a victim to this have done something wrong. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was doing exactly what you, your parents, your friends, your colleagues, or children or family members could have been doing. He wasn't doing anything close to nefarious. Please know this. Let others know However, this is what makes the situation so incredibly sad and scary, that this could easily have been your family member. Black, white, brown, male, female, old, or young. And it is also what makes it so hard for us to accept. I will be the first to admit that because of my background and elitist attitudes, holding a bachelor's degree and a Juris Doctorate degree, admitted to the Washington, D.C. bar, a senior executive in the government, I somehow believe that my family and I were exempt from such atrocities. Again, I say, nothing could be further from the truth. I sometimes think that just one minor scheduling change or 15-minute shift in time, it would not have been my Joseph. And you may shudder to think that it could have been your child, grandchild, niece, or nephew. It's rarely discussed, but my Joseph was attempting to be the peacemaker amongst folks he didn't know, keeping the peace, extending himself, his kindness towards others. But this was evil behind a gun with reckless abandon, so easily accessible to any and all that desire one. My family and I remain angry, confused, mystified, perplexed, and in prayer, working hard to walk by faith and not by sight, trying ever so hard to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and lean not to our own understanding. I pray every day that God will wake me up from this nightmare, that my sons and daughter, Joseph, Alec, and Sharia, will wake me up and say, "It was just a bad dream, Mom. It's okay." Please know and understand that this so easily could have been you or your family member. And we absolutely must do something to stem this horrific tide of gun violence before it hits your very own backyard. Please, please, I am begging you, act now. Your lives, your children's lives, your grandchildren's lives are depending on it. Now I want to yield the rest of my time to my son. He has brief comments, and he's a millennial. I think we should hear from him as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mrs. Bose. Yes, Alec.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak and giving me the time to say my piece. And I also want to thank my family for allowing me to represent them as well. So I know I don't have a lot of time. I know that we've heard a lot, so I'll be brief. But the main point I want to make is that this doesn't end for us. This doesn't end for people like Miss Wheeler, Mr. Gutenberg, or my mom. This doesn't end just when the news cycle says so. It doesn't end after the Senate goes out of session. It does not end for us. I have to see my mom and my dad tortured every day. I have to watch my grandmother in her 80s develop depression because she knows she outlived her grandson. I have to see my friends cry when they come over my house because my brother's picture is still up on the wall. Now I know everybody, all these senators here probably agree with our sentiments, and I really do appreciate you guys allowing us to speak. And that's what makes it even more frustrating to see your colleagues move on so quickly, openly, and say that they're going to move on to less pressing issues. It's disgusting to me. And I want you all to know, I'm sorry. But I'm happy, I'm pleased, I'm optimistic to see that we're all here. And I hope that you all know, and I hope that your colleagues know. I hope that the NRA knows. I hope that the pro-gun lobbies and the gun manufacturers know that we aren't going anywhere. We are more energized than ever. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Alec, thank you very much. That was a very powerful statement, and we're counting on you not going anywhere. Chief Stawinski, thank you so much for the leadership role that you play and the efforts that you're involved in, and we appreciate your being here today.
Senator Stabenow, it is a genuine privilege to be before you, my friend Senator Van Hollen, and all of the other senators assembled. My name is Hank Stawinski, and I have the privilege of being the Chief of Police in Prince George's County, Maryland. Ladies and gentlemen, it offends the dignity of our nation that our children attend our schools in fear. My colleagues across this nation and I are the people who the community calls when they need help, when they need protection. I've experienced this myself. I have responded to these calls. And what is more, in my current role as chief, I have borne the responsibility for sending my officers into harm's way to protect the children of whom we are speaking. And it is a concerning issue that my officers are responding to these threats now on a daily basis. Men and women across this nation and law enforcement are entrusted with keeping the families, the neighborhoods, and communities of our country safe. It's a responsibility I take particularly seriously because I am not from somewhere else. Prince George's County is and always has been my home, and I chose to serve as a law enforcement officer only in Prince George's County. It's that personal responsibility that I feel that brings me here before you today. And it encourages me to work harder each and every day with my neighbors, with my community, to develop the relationships that are critical to preventing these sorts of tragedies from happening in the first place. In a nation of over 300 million, there are less than 1 million police officers. Without the community's support, the public trust, without their willingness to bring concern and information forward, we cannot succeed. That is vital. I want you to know that I am comfortable in bridging gaps, in creating partnerships. Where I look to you for help, and I know that I will receive it, is in policy. In Prince George's County, 80 people were murdered last year, and 69 of them were murdered with a handgun or a firearm. This problem is not specific to my community, and the tragedies of which we speak here today and have been enumerated are the acute pain that our nation feels. But those cases are the chronic pain that my community feels day in and day out. They don't receive national attention, but I feel that, and my officers feel that, and my community feels that. And those cases are as important to those families as these cases to these families. And I urge you not to forget the chronic pain associated with gun violence in conjunction with the acute pain that we feel in these national tragedies. Make no mistake, gun violence impacts every community. 14 days ago, Mujahid Ramzadeen, a brave officer of over 14 years, off duty, came to the aid of a neighbor, stood his ground in defense of that individual, a victim of domestic violence, and lost his life. I am proud of Mujahid Ramzadeen, but he should be with us today, serving my community, because quite frankly, there's only 1,700 men and women as part of my institution, and I value each of them, and I can't afford to lose one. And I will pause briefly, if you'll allow me, and introduce to you his wife, Tammy, who is here to support me.
Thank you.
One of the strongest people it has been my privilege to meet in my career. She is here to support me as I endeavor to support you in your efforts and support her and the men and women of law enforcement and families across our nation. Officer fatalities with firearms in this nation are up. I know you know that. That keeps me up at night. Domestic violence situations are particularly dangerous, and it led to the death of Mujahid. Most of the time, in those situations when they become violent, law enforcement officers across this nation lose their lives to firearms. And we're protected. We have body armor. We have training. And if that's the situation with the professionals who choose to protect, what hope of the ordinary citizen? From 2001 to 2012, more than 6,410 women were killed in the United States, victims of domestic violence. More than the number of our troops in the military serving during the same period in Iraq and Afghanistan. My undying respect to our military. But this is an epidemic. It is a public health crisis. And I agree with the remarks of some of my other panelists. This is a problem that can be solved. And to do this, we need to close loopholes in our laws that you are so familiar with. Federal law prohibits individuals convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence from purchasing or possessing a gun, but only if that person has a qualifying relationship with his or her victim, meaning that they were married, lived together, or share a child in common. Despite the fact that current or former dating partners are more likely to injure their victims than spouses. We need to work together to close that loophole. Similarly, individuals convicted of misdemeanor stalking, a crime which I take gravely seriously, which we often see starting as a felony but being pled down, are not prohibited from gun possession. That must change. Lastly, we can and must do more to ensure that those individuals who are prohibited from accessing guns, as the individual who killed Mujahid was, surrender these firearms to the appropriate authorities. I acknowledge that domestic violence is not the only danger that my and other officers across this nation face. Gun-related incidents overall were the primary cause of death for law enforcement in 2016, when the number of law enforcement officers who were killed with a gun was at its highest rate in over 20 years. And often the people who commit these crimes have long criminal records. I'm providing this testimony before you today as you consider the need to protect all corners of our community from gun violence. And on behalf of my officers and law enforcement across this nation, I implore you to close the loopholes that I've spoken of, the others that I know you're cognizant of. I, again, am comfortable in forming partnerships and building bridges. But again, I look to you for help with policy. And let me conclude with this. With all deference to Mrs. Bowes and your compelling remarks, by virtue of my chosen profession, I know all too well that none of us are safe. And what brings me before you today is the brightest child I know. She's 9. Her name is Alexandra. And Ruby asked me, how do you do this? I do this on behalf of my daughter, Alexandra. I'm here today on behalf of the men and women of law enforcement and on behalf of my daughter, knowing that we are committed to seeing that what happened to my panelists, my heart goes out to you, never happens to another family. So I thank you. You have my respect, and you have my full support as you endeavor to take us forward.
Thank you so much, Chief, to you and to the men and women that serve with you and in all of our communities. And we know today this is about violence in school. It's also about violence in home. It's also about violence in the community. It's about stopping gun violence. And I want to take a moment just to go out of order because Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is our leader on the issue that relates to domestic violence, I know has to step away in a moment, and I want to recognize her for a moment to speak about really the leadership that she's been providing. And Chief, she's been giving us the same statistics that you talked about today as she's been advocating.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Stabenow, and I want to thank all of you. This has been an incredible moment. I wish that our colleagues weren't hiding from you and that they were here to listen to this. And I am in support of all of the bills, the universal background check, assault weapons, everything you raised. But I did want to just one focus here with the chief. Those were the exact numbers I gave to the President of the United States when I sat across from him at that meeting at the White House last week. And then he said that he wanted to include, in addition to many of these other provisions and a universal background check, closing those loopholes on the dating partners and the stalking that are in the bill that I'm leading, that is similar to the bill in the House, and Senator Blumenthal has worked on this as well, in a package. So I just ask you, Chief, to help me to hold him to it. I know he respects law enforcement, and I think he better listen to law enforcement on this, because we have, as you point out, over 6,000 women have been killed by guns in domestic violence situations. And so many times we had an officer in our state as well killed going to one of those scenes. He had body armor on, but he was shot in the head. And he left 3 kids behind, including a little girl in a blue dress with stars that I saw come down the aisle of that church. So I really appreciate you including this, and all of you who know that this would not have saved your baby, Francine. But knowing that you need to do these measures as well to have as thorough of a bill as we can get passed. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you so much. And this is in our background check. This is in our.
It is in ours, yes.
So,
but the president said he would put it in his. So I think that's really important to know.
Absolutely. Eva Jones, we thank you for flying across the country from Oregon to be here and to lend your voice. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Eva Jones. I'm a sophomore from Hood River, a rural town in Oregon. Since middle school, the first day of school has been accompanied by not only excitement from the new year, but what should be irrational worries. Every time I walk into a new classroom, I plan where I would hide in the case of a school shooting. I think about how dangerous it would be to have so many beautiful windows that look out to the Columbia River. This is the daily reality for 50 million school children across the United States. I have friends whose hearts jump every time someone enters a classroom unexpectedly. After every shooting across the country, my teachers explained to me and my classmates how they'd sacrifice their lives for us, that they'd tackle a shooter if they somehow entered the classroom. In my math class, instead of learning integration techniques, we discussed the pros and cons of hiding under our desks like we're told, or tackling the attacker. That was bad. I would like to say that we are terrified. That would be the rational response. Don't get me wrong, there is a part of us that is. But school-wide murder has been so normalized by gun culture that we approach these like a fire drill. This makes me sick. Millions of children are rationally preparing for student slaughter, and this is normalized. We cannot allow our nation to go along with this any longer. It is not normal to visualize myself hiding in the closets of Miss Notaboom's room during journalism class. It is not normal to have my teachers instruct us that if there ever is a school shooting, we are to lock the door immediately and leave them outside to look for stragglers. It is not normal to have 2 or 3 gun threats a year, to wonder what makes police so sure that these threats aren't credible. We, the students, the victims, are left in the dark. We are on the receiving end of everyone's analysis of the situation. But it's time for our analysis. I live in rural Oregon. I have plenty of gun-owning neighbors. But to kids, this is not a partisan issue. NRA lobbyists are making this a divisive matter. It's not. American citizens do not need access to military-grade weapons of war. It's time for America to put the education and lives of their children in front of their gun fetish. Government officials and adults who haven't set foot in a school in over 30 years are calling for tighter security in our schools. Adults don't know what school is like today. Most schools across the country are already equipped with identification on entry, locked door policies, and on-campus police. Increasing police presence, locking students in, installing safety huts and metal detectors, these are all notions based on the acceptance that our schools are going to get shot up in America. As a student, I can assure you that increasing security is not the answer. Locking up our school, it's a teacher's job to create an innovative learning environment for their students. Locking up our schools would inhibit any growth and imagination. Turning American schools into prisons will completely destroy any educational environment that fosters learning and curiosity. If you are immersed into an atmosphere of fear and walls, you cannot focus on creative problem solving and growth. Security is not the issue, so do not try and put this on our tireless teachers or school administrators. It is not a complex issue. We need gun legislation to increase background checks, close all loopholes, raise the gun ownership age, and ban all assault weapons. All semi and fully automatic weapons, all accessories, all military-grade weapons of war. Do not try and pass the blame or responsibility. It is your job to ensure our safety through legislation, not mine or my teachers. I do not need to read out statistics to show you that the rates of gun violence in America surpass every other developed nation. I am not content allowing my peers to try and learn in an environment like this any longer. American students will not stand by and watch our classmates' murders week after week. We are the ones most affected by these shootings, and we cannot even vote. It is infuriating to have our lives valued less than a collectible. We will not accept this. We are sick of living like this, so I assure you we will be relentless. We won't stop marching. We will keep fighting weapons and those who protect them over us. We will vote soon, and we aren't going to stop until something changes.
Thank you, Eva. I'm so glad that Senator Wyden suggested that you join us. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now, last but definitely not least, we want to hear from a teacher, Katrina Kickbush. Thank you so much for joining us.
Senator STABENOW and members of this committee, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Katrina Kickbush, and I am a special education teacher at Wolf Street Academy in Baltimore, Maryland, where I serve also as our building rep for the Baltimore Teachers Union and an AFT affiliate. 24 years ago, I made the choice to become a teacher because I see education as the foundation for positively shaping the next generation of American citizens. Schools are supposed to be places of warmth, growth, and learning, where children are allowed and encouraged to act their age, make mistakes, and become the people they will be. A place where students' hidden talents and deep passions are nurtured and encouraged. But this world of children, a world of safety, a world of trust, stands in jeopardy. Because of the lack of common sense gun laws that place the value of a child's life below that of an individual who wished to buy and carry weapons designed for mass destruction, our children face daily reminders that their lives could come crashing down around them. We have to ask 4-year-olds to not only be prepared to read and write, but be prepared to face an active shooter in their building. Multiple times each year, our students must perform lockdowns as if any one of them might be the real thing. In that moment, when the code is announced throughout the school, the goal of every individual in that building is no longer the development and growth of young children. The goal becomes staying alive, keeping others alive. Each teacher walks towards their classroom door, removes the tiny magnet that keeps our constantly locked doors from latching all day. We cover windows so that no one can tell if there are people in the room, hoping that if we are quiet enough, a shooter will pass by. Our students are trained to move to an identified location in the room. This is the place where, if a shooter decided to shoot through the door, through a window, or through a sheetrock, the bullets would be least likely to hit them. We take attendance. We note the name of the child who left to the bathroom. We hope that he and all the other children who are moving through the building find the closest safe place to hide. And then we wait. We don't open the door for anyone. We stay quiet. We silently pray. A building that is designed for life and joy, learning and exploration, is silent. Often, in the younger grades, students are cuddling up next to their teacher just to feel some sense of safety. And this is only a drill. This is not just hypothetical. 2 years ago, while students at my school played on the playground, 2 men were shot and killed directly across the street on the steps of a home of one of our families. Hearing the shots, the teacher huddled the students in a corner, hoping that the shooter had accomplished his goal and would pass them by. The building went on lockdown while police scoured the neighborhood looking for the perpetrator. As the scene was secured, students cried and hugged their friends, and parents made their way to the school. While comforting students and families, staff members had to deal with their own response to this situation. Those moments immediately after a shooting are only the first step in a process of recovery, a process that has become more and more a process of acceptance of a new reality. The following day, attendance is low, and hours are spent helping children and families make sense of what happened, helping to rebuild the safety that we have worked so hard to build initially. After the most recent mass Florida shooting, my own 15-year-old daughter asked me what I would do if a gunman came into my school. I turned the question around and asked her what she would want me to do. She thought for a moment and then responded, "Mom, I really want you to come home. But I know you. You love your students, and you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't try and save them. It makes me sad, and it makes me angry that I am being put in a position of having to make the impossible decision of protecting my students, my colleagues, or being there to see my own children grow up. Unfortunately, some feel that gun laws need to be changed so that more guns are placed in schools, more bullets to threaten others, including arming teachers. Everything I have said today and everything for which I entered teaching stands against arming teachers. We are trained to be compassionate, patient, and encouraging. We willingly take on additional duties due to lack of funding, such as being a parent, a social worker, and a mentor. Now I'm being asked to be an armed guard. This is not a school where I want to teach. This is not a school where I want my students to attend. I have made the decision that I will do everything in my power to protect my students. I will stand with them in the face of an intruder. But this is not a decision I or any other educator should have to make. We need change.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your powerful statements. Really amazing. We're now going to turn to some questions. And first, both Eva and Alec, as the young people here, I know David had to sign off by Skype. If the President of the United States were here right now and all of Congress was here, Eva, what would you want to tell them?
I would like to tell them that it's not time. They need to get the money out of this situation. It's not about money. It's not about lives. And we're not going to go anywhere until it is safe for every child in America to go to school. Because, I mean, I work a lot on getting education to, like, other kids in other countries. And in a developed nation where we hold education so high, we're still scared to go to school, and that needs to be fixed right now. And I would tell them that if they didn't want to join me, that they should get out of our way, because it's time for maybe a change in legislators or officials if they're not ready to take that on.
Thank you. Alec, from your perspective, if the President were here and others members of Congress, what would you want to say to them?
Thank you, Senator. Just for the record, I'm 24. I'm not nearly as young enough.
Well, as a millennial.
Yes. So what I would tell them is specifically that I don't want to become old in the Wild West. It seems like the conversation has turned to everybody getting more guns as to essentially be threatening the entire populace with violence if violence begets them. I speak to so many NRA members, as Fred was talking about, and they always say, well, if your brother had a gun, he probably would have been safer. And I said, well, that doesn't really make me feel better. That just means that he would still be under the threat of violence. He would still be under the threat of being shot, and all that he would have is just to draw his gun quicker. And I think one thing that the President said was that, there's movies, the movies are the problem, and the video games are the problem. And maybe they are, but not for the reasons that he was saying. It's probably because we think that those people think that they're heroes. They're the heroes in the action movie. They're the John McClane. They're the action hero that's going to take out the shooter and become the hero. And I don't want to live in that country. I don't want to live in an action movie. I want to live in a safe country where my family and students like Eva are not under constant threat of violence. And I think that would be what I would have to say to them, is that you do not look at the situation as everybody, yes, we believe everybody has a right to defend themselves, but it doesn't make it easier for everybody to just have the most dangerous tools out there to do so. That's what I would tell them.
Thank you so much. Ms. Kickbush, you spoke about not wanting to be armed with a gun. But tell us, as we deal with budgets, the budget's coming up now, as well as state levels. We all say our children are the most important thing. Education's important. Doesn't get reflected too many times in the budget. But if you were really going to have what you need in the classroom and what your children need in the classroom to really be armed and prepared for them and their success, in light of all of this, what would that be? What would that look like?
Well, I've always said that we fund what we value, and as much as we say we value education, the funding is always not there. And so the reality of schools these days is teachers are being cut, nurses are being cut, mental health professionals are being cut. We are saying, sure, 40 kids in a classroom, that's great. That teacher can make that personal connection. That's impossible. We need we need funding. We need smaller class sizes so that teachers can make that one-on-one connection. Because even though it's not happening right now, when a student walks into the building, I can tell based on the look on that child's face how they're feeling and whether they need somebody to go up to them and say, hey, what's going on? Talk to me. The number one thing is not only do we need our buildings up to date. I don't know if any of you have heard about the state that the Baltimore City Public Schools are in, where we closed down because some didn't even have heat. We need structures so that the building is safe, but we need funding for mental health professionals at every level of education, because growing up today is different. Things that happened to us growing up are not even the same as what our children are going through. They need somebody to talk to. We need to stop it early on and get them the help so that there's not a cumulative effect that we then see later on down the line.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Senator Nelson next, and then our other colleagues. Yes, thank you.
One question, Fred, this is so raw for you. So after the march, millions of people marching, and it all dies down, how do you keep it going?
Do not let it become a political moment, number one. Last week, many of you sat around with the president, sat, talked, said a lot of things, and within a day or two, that was pretty much undermined by tweets and other messages. The day of my daughter's funeral, there was a tweet linking the murder of my kid and the other 16 to the Russia probe. So the first thing is, I need all of you, and I have to hold all of you accountable to making sure this is seen as a real moment, not a political moment, a moment of change, a moment where you all need to stand up and be leaders and do something. Okay, that's what I need. I can't count on us to be the ones to make it happen. I'm hopeful the media will keep their eyes on the story, but let's face it, new stories come up. I understand you have a lot of colleagues who didn't want to be here today. Well, guess what? If they won't be here, then we should keep doing this. And we should do this publicly, and we should invite the media, and we should take the pressure from the outside and bring it in, okay? How is it possible that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell will not talk about this? Won't have a real hearing? People are dying. Real legislation is needed. So if we can't do this in the formal way, let's bring the pressure from the outside in. I can tell you, I'm not going anywhere. These kids are not going anywhere. I'll come back. They'll come back. This one was different. We're all motivated. We won't let the story die, but you betcha I need your help. This is not a political moment. This is life or death.
Thank you very much. And Senator Blumenthal, then Senator Kane, and then Senator Wyden.
You know, I have rarely experienced so powerful a moment as this hearing, serving in the United States Senate, perhaps in public life, except for the experience at Sandy Hook in the hours and days following that shooting, and my knowing the Sandy Hook families. Each of you is really be thanked by America. And Fred, I just want to say we have an obligation to stand up as you are doing and to speak out. The only place in America this issue is political is in this building. The rest of America is united across party lines, geographic boundaries, religions, race, that we need to do something about gun violence because none of us is immune. As all of you have said, we could be in your shoes right now. Any of us who are parents live with this potential nightmare. Chief, I want to ask you a quick question. Arming teachers, do you think law enforcement favors providing more arms, more weapons to teachers?
Senator, I doubt the value of escalation of force in this matter. As a young child, I recall being trained to duck and cover. And I hear young people like Eva talk about the same experiences I had, and I had thought as a younger man that those days were behind us. To the point that's being made by the brave people that I am privileged to join today, a goodly portion of my work is about polarization and addressing polarization. This is not a moment for partisanship. This is a moment for peoplehood. And an escalation of arms race between people who seek to do harm and people who seek to defend children, I don't see the value in that. I think the principles that you have laid forth and that you are advancing hold the greatest promise. And the last thing I'll say with response to your question is that my focus for my community is about that community. Again, we're a handful of law enforcement officers in a brilliant nation, but those relationships can lead to prevention. And what I don't want is for a teacher to become involved in a gunfight. What I want is for law enforcement to prevent that gunfight from happening in the first place.
Using arms in the middle of an active shooter situation is hugely perilous, is it not?
Anytime a weapon goes off, someone's in danger.
There's confusion and chaos and the danger of innocent bystanders, even with some minimal training, is tremendous.
Senator, let me give you an example. When we train our officers on how to use the weapons that we carry daily in a training environment, the block that precedes actually handling a weapon goes into extraordinary detail about the dangers of manipulating this weapon, constantly being cognizant of where it's being pointed at. You introduce into that chaotic environment people who, out of all due respect, are enthusiastic amateurs with these as opposed to trained professionals, you're introducing the potential for greater harm. And again, my focus as a leader in law enforcement is on preventing any gunfight from happening in the first place.
And I'm so grateful that you raised this issue of domestic violence, because domestic violence is a scourge. It is part of this epidemic generally of violence in our society. This is International Women's Week or Day, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this bill on red flags now, because a huge number, perhaps a majority, of guns taken away from people who are regarded as danger occur because a spouse or a partner reports that danger of imminent harm. And prevention is exactly what we should be doing. Prevention to take guns out of the hands of dangerous people before they shoot children or spouses or partners or strangers, 90 of them every day. So I thank you and the other panelists for helping us to prevent gun violence.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow, and thanks to all of you for taking the most painful moments you've experienced, but trying to put them to use for others. I've despaired about this ever since the shooting at Virginia Tech, because I've seen these tragedies just pile up one after the next, and Congress not be willing to do anything about it. And I've supported all kinds of bills, but I do think this moment may open a moment for some reason. I think the advocacy of these young people, just like in the Birmingham March in 1963, it was the marching of the young people that sort of changed the dynamic and really changed the dynamic of the civil rights movement. I just want to say this. There are 3 lies that get told about this topic, and I think all of us have to educate our broader communities about these lies. One is you'll hear people saying it's not about guns. It's about everything else other than guns. Now, it would be a lie to say all of it's about guns, or it's only about guns. There's all kinds of issues. There's mental health and school security, et cetera. But when people try to say it's not about guns, they're wrong. I was the mayor of a city that when I first got elected, we had the second highest homicide rate in the United States, Richmond, Virginia. And I went to too many funerals and too many wakes and too many victim family support group meetings. But we brought homicide down. We brought aggravated assault down because we put strategies in place that reduced what our law enforcement guys called the gun carry rate. How many times in 100 random stops is somebody they carrying a gun? We had an unusually high gun carry rate in Virginia. We did things that didn't necessarily turn bad people to good people, but we did things that made people decide, maybe I'll leave the gun in the sock drawer today instead of carrying it with me. And when we did, we reduced our homicide rate and our aggravated assault rate. It was about guns. It is about guns. Other things too, but we can't ignore guns. Second lie, that there's nothing we can do about it. You hear this all the time. Oh, a background record check wouldn't have stopped that guy, or a magazine ban wouldn't have stopped that person. The NRA loves this to try to debunk the notion that steps taken will make us safer. No, to the contrary, these steps do take us safer, and we've learned that through painful experiences. Lori knows that the shooter at Virginia Tech, Sung-Wee Cho, was a deranged young person who had been treated appropriately for mental health in his high school community where everybody knew his situation. But when he moves into a university setting and none of the information goes with him and he's a free agent, nobody knows how to help this precious young person succeed, then he goes off the rails. He was adjudicated mentally ill and dangerous. He was prohibited from having a weapon, but he fell through a glitch in the background check system. And so what we learned from Virginia Tech is have a better background check system. If you have universal background checks and entry of data in the system, you will be safer. That was the lesson from Virginia Tech, but my legislature and Congress still hasn't embraced it. But when people tell you there's nothing that can be done, they're lying. There's all kinds of steps we can take that will make us safer. The third lie that you hear over and over again is, oh, this stuff would violate the Second Amendment. Violates the Second Amendment to consider this or consider that. The Second Amendment is the only amendment that uses the phrase well-regulated right in the amendment. Those who wrote it up understood that guns were dangerous and that there needed to be some notion of regulation. They understood that at the time, and guns are a lot more dangerous now than we were then. And we tolerate all kinds of regulations. In most states, Virginia, I was just checking this out, there's a limitation on the size of a magazine that you can take to hunt a deer. Like in Kentucky, I just checked it, it pulled up. The magazine limit in Kentucky, if you want to hunt a deer or a bear, you are legally prohibited from having a magazine with more than 10 rounds in it. Because that wouldn't give the bear or the deer a fighting chance if you had 30. You can't tell me that we can't regulate the kind of weapon you can hunt an animal with or the size of the magazine you can hunt an animal with, but the Second Amendment says it's just absolutely free range and free season on human beings. I mean, all of these rules have been upheld. They're all consistent with the Second Amendment. So when people tell you or the NRA perpetrates the lie that you can't do things that violates the Second Amendment, it is a lie. And they accept regulations of the very kind we're talking about when it comes to magazine restrictions on deer hunting, and they're trying to tell us we can't do a restriction when it comes to people. So we have to push back against these lies, call them out for what they are, and your strong testimony today helps give us the energy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. Thank you very much. Senator Wyden.
Eva, thank you very much. And you have made your small community 3,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. very, very proud today. And I was particularly struck when we were in Odell. You wondered if adults would pay any attention to you and your voice would count. After you spoke, as far as I can tell, your name has actually been mentioned by more adults and more senators than anyone else. So it's pretty clear your message is getting through. What I'd like to ask you about is something we really haven't gotten into much today, and that is what these issues mean for rural communities, for rural America. And you said something very important that I think ought to be really positive. You said, my friends know lots about guns, and everybody's out and about and hunting and fishing. It's a way of life. But we've had it. We have had it, hiding in the cabinets and steering clear of the windows. And then you said, we don't see these as partisan issues. We don't think there's anything to do with Democrats and Republicans here. This is about, for an elected official, you either get it or you don't. You either understand this is about safety or you don't. And in a sense, your generation may be saying something very powerful to the rest of the country. That you come back here and you talk about Democrats and Republicans. My name's Eva Jones, and I went to a town meeting in Odell, and we don't think this is about Democrats and Republicans. So tell us a little bit more about how your generation's going to break new ground in terms of getting people here to stop thinking about Democrats and Republicans and just respond to what you're talking about, this ever-present fear and sense of violence, because I think your message is really pretty optimistic.
So living in a rural community, there is tons of hunting, and there are, especially in the Upper Valley, like people really like their guns, but that doesn't mean at least to the kids, I'm not going to speak for their parents, but to the kids, like they're still going through everything that I'm going through and every other kid across America is, and that your hunting guns, what I think is really interesting is a lot of people, especially who don't live in communities where there are guns, are, oh my gosh, everyone's going to take away our guns. It's like, hey, you really don't understand guns then, because hunting guns are extremely different from these like man-killing machines that are being altered and made. It's like totally different. I mean, leaving bullet holes the size of oranges through people's body is not the same as a shotgun that you're going to have to reload each time you want to hunt an animal. But with like partisan issues, one thing that I think the problem is, I'm sorry, but just with elected officials right now, is that no matter what the problem is, a lot of it is about money and re-election. And I know this is not true for everyone, but the shift needs to be focused away from your personal agenda or your re-election campaign, and more on what you want to do and why you want to help our nation. Another thing, just everyone, all kids are just really, they get wrapped up into this world of Democrat and Republican, and we can't help but be influenced by it and make quick judgments. And as high schoolers, we're already nuts.
You're doing great.
Well, I forgot the word, but we're just going to move on.
Right.
We're already prone. Oh, God, I got it. Prone. We're already prone to do that. And so I think that if our adults and mentors in our life and our elected officials can try to mirror what we should be doing and listening to each other and worrying more about what we're doing rather than other people and petty things, that I think that would really help. But I think a lot of people have realized what change they can make themselves, and they're ready to do that. And I know I am. So.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Senator Stabenow.
Thank you very much. As we wrap up, we want to thank each of you. We wish there's so many more things to say, but each of you have said things that are incredibly powerful. And I think the most important thing is that this is personal. This is not political. It's not partisan. It shouldn't be about money. It's personal. And you have, by your courage in being here today, reminded us that is personal, and we need to redouble our efforts and recommit ourselves to make sure that this changes. This has to change. So thank you very, very much. Hearing's adjourned.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow.
Thank you.
Senator Nelson.
Just a little bit. You have my information, and I'm going to get everything else's information. So, thank you.